Parents disowned me for my career choice. Now they need my permission for Dad's surgery. The irony was so thick I could have performed surgery on it. For 10 years, I hadn't heard my mother's voice. Not on my birthday, not when I graduated top of my class from medical school, and not when I got engaged to Mark, the kindest man I'd ever met. Her last words to me were screamed across the marble floor of their ridiculously oversized foyer. A surgeon? That's a man's job, Claire. It's messy. It's vulgar. You were supposed to run the gallery. You were supposed to be a lady. They disowned me for choosing surgery. Now they need my permission for Dad's life. The irony was thick. For 10 years, my mother's voice was silent. Subscribe and leave a like to see where my life's path led. My father, Arthur, just stood there, polishing his glasses, his silence a louder condemnation than her yelling. He wanted me to marry the son of his business partner, a boy named Bryce with a trust fund and the personality of a wet paper bag. My life was a business transaction they had planned from my birth. When I told them I had accepted a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins, they didn't just disapprove. They erased me. They sent a letter from their lawyer, a man named Mr. Grant, formally disinheriting me and stating they no longer considered me their daughter. I was 22. I cried for a week. Then I packed my 2 suitcases and never looked back. Now, a decade later, I was the chief surgical resident at Mount Sinai. My life wasn't what they'd planned, but it was mine. I lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment in the city with Mark. It wasn't a mansion, but it was filled with secondhand books, the smell of coffee, and the sound of his gentle laughter. We were happy. I had built a life from the ashes of their rejection, a life of purpose. I saved people. I held organs in my hands. I stitched wounds closed. I fought death every single day, and sometimes I won. It was messy, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever done. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office, reviewing patient charts, a lukewarm coffee in my hand. The caller ID was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Is this Claire?" a woman's voice asked. It was thin, brittle, like old paper. I almost didn't recognize it. "This is Dr. Miller," I replied, my voice cool and professional. A pause. "Claire, it's your mother." I felt the air leave my lungs. My mother. Barbara. After 10 years of absolute silence, I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch, listening to her ragged breathing on the other end. I pictured her standing in that same marble foyer, her perfectly styled hair, her expensive silk blouse, a wrinkle of annoyance on her forehead because I wasn't falling at her feet. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "It's about your father." "I don't have a father," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. It was a reflex, a decade-old defense mechanism. "Don't be ridiculous, Claire," she snapped, a flash of the old Barbara. "This is serious. He's sick." I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Every unanswered birthday card, every holiday spent alone, every achievement celebrated only by myself and later by Mark, it all rose up in my throat. "He collapsed at the club," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "His heart. It's bad, Claire. Very bad." I still said nothing. I was a surgeon. I dealt with bad news every day. Her panic didn't move me. "He needs a procedure," she continued, desperate now. "It's experimental, a cardiac regeneration therapy. There's only one surgeon in the country who is leading the trial, a Dr. Evans at Cedar Crest Hospital." I knew Dr. Evans. He was a legend. He was also my former mentor and a close colleague. The world suddenly felt very, very small. "So?" I asked. "What does that have to do with me? You have money. Hire him." This was the moment. The crack in her voice deepened. "We can't. There's a problem. Some legal issue. Because the procedure is experimental, the hospital board requires consent from the legal next of kin with medical power of attorney." I could hear the rustle of papers. She was reading from a script her lawyer had probably given her. When we, she stammered. "That document we had you sign, it seems it legally severed our parental rights. According to the hospital's legal team, You are still his only living child. You are his next of kin. They won't proceed without your signature, Claire. They won't save his life unless you give them permission. I leaned back in my chair. The cheap pleather squeaked. Outside my window, the New York skyline was gray and imposing. For 10 years, they had held all the power. They had the money, the status, the ability to cut me off and leave me with nothing. But in a single moment, on a random Tuesday morning, all of that power had shifted. It had flowed through the phone line and settled squarely in my hands. My permission, my signature, my choice. I see, I said, my voice dangerously calm. The silence on the other end was no longer angry or impatient. It was terrified. For the first time in my life, my mother was afraid of me. I let the silence hang in the air, a weapon I had never been allowed to use before. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head, trying to find a new angle, a new way to manipulate me. Claire, please. Barbara's voice was different now. The sharp edge was gone, replaced by a thin, desperate plea. He's your father. A father doesn't have his lawyer send a letter to his 22-year-old daughter to tell her she's no longer part of the family, I said, my voice even. A father doesn't miss her graduation from medical school. A father doesn't pretend she doesn't exist for a decade. We were wrong, she whispered. The admission was so quiet I almost missed it. It was a crack in the dam of her pride. We were so wrong, Claire. But please, don't let him die because of our pride. Our pride, not my pride. Even now, she couldn't fully own it. I thought of all the nights I had studied until my eyes burned, fueled by coffee and the burning need to prove them wrong. I thought of Mark holding me when I cried on my 30th birthday, because the only card I got was from my landlord. Every ounce of pain and rejection solidified into a cold, hard resolve in my chest. I'll meet you, I said finally. A sob of relief on the other end. Oh, thank you, Claire. Thank you. We can send the car. Where are you? We'll come right now. No, I cut her off. We're not doing this on your terms. Not anymore. I looked at the clock on my wall. It was almost noon. There's a diner on Lexington, the Blue Plate. It's a block from the hospital. Be there at 7 tonight. Both of you. A diner? Her voice was laced with disgust. I could picture her wrinkling her nose. She hadn't been in a place without valet parking in 30 years. Can't we meet at the plaza or our lawyer's office? The diner, 7 o'clock, I repeated. If you're not there, I'll assume you've made other arrangements for Arthur's care. I used his first name deliberately, turning him from my father into just a man, a patient, a problem to be solved. And Barbara? Come alone with him. No lawyers, no Mr. Grant, just the three of us. A family reunion. I hung up before she could argue. My hand was trembling. I set the phone down on my desk and stared at my fingers. These were the hands that held scalpels, that sutured arteries, that could remain perfectly steady for 12 hours straight inside a person's chest. My old mentor, Dr. Evans, used to say, "The steadiest hand holds the sharpest scalpel, Claire. It's not about strength, it's about control." Right now, I didn't feel in control. I felt like a frayed wire. I finished my shift in a daze, my mind a million miles away from the charts and post-op reports. When I got home, the smell of garlic and basil filled our small apartment. Mark was in the kitchen, humming along to some indie band, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. He turned when I came in, and his smile was all the warmth I had been missing for the last 10 years. "Hey, you," he said, wiping his hands on a towel and wrapping his arms around me. "Tough day?" I buried my face in his chest and just breathed him in. He didn't push. He just held me until the trembling in my hands finally stopped. We sat on our lumpy second-hand couch and I told him everything. The phone call, the diagnosis, the experimental procedure, and the signature they needed. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from shock to anger, and finally to a deep, quiet concern. He wasn't looking at me like I was a tool for revenge. He was looking at me like a woman whose deepest wounds had just been ripped open. "So," he said softly, taking my hand, "what are you going to do?" I looked around our apartment. At the mismatched mugs we'd collected, the stack of books threatening to topple over, the framed photo of us hiking last fall. It was a life built from scratch, a life they had no part in, a life they would never understand. They had tried to erase me, but I had simply drawn myself a new world. For 10 years, they treated me like a bad investment they'd written off, I said, my voice low. Now, their most valuable asset is about to collapse, and they've discovered that the only person who can authorize the insurance claim is the one they threw away. Mark squeezed my hand. This isn't business, Claire. It always was to them, I replied, looking him in the eye. My life, my career, my marriage, it was all a merger they were trying to arrange. They understand contracts. They understand terms and conditions. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a surgeon who has just found the perfect line for the first incision. They want my signature on a consent form, I said. But before I give it to them, they're going to sign something for me. I stood up and walked to my small desk, pulling out a fresh legal pad and a pen. They wanted a lady who ran an art gallery. Instead, they got a surgeon, and I'm about to perform the most delicate operation of my life. The Blue Plate diner smelled of grease and old coffee, a scent so far removed from my childhood that it felt like another country. I chose a booth in the back, the red vinyl cracked in a spiderweb pattern. I ordered a black coffee I didn't intend to drink and watched the door. My old mentor, Dr. Evans, used to say, "The steadiest hand holds the sharpest scalpel, Claire. It's not about strength, it's about control." Tonight, my control was everything. I had spent the afternoon drafting my own terms, not on a legal pad, but in my head, each clause precise and sharp. At exactly 7 o'clock, they walked in. It was like watching a nature documentary where two exotic birds accidentally wander into a chicken coop. My mother, Barbara, wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car. She scanned the room with a look of profound disgust, her hand clutching a designer handbag like a life raft. My father, Arthur, looked smaller than I remembered. His face was pale, his expensive suit hung on him, and he leaned on my mother's arm. For a moment, the surgeon in me took over, assessing his pallor, the slight tremor in his hand, the subtle shortness of breath. His condition was deteriorating. They saw me and made their way to the booth. Barbara slid in opposite me, careful not to let her coat touch the floor. Arthur sat beside her, sinking into the vinyl with a soft sigh. The silence was thick. A waitress came over, and my mother waved her away with a flick of her wrist as if shooing a fly. "Claire," Barbara began, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "This is absurd. A diner? Really?" "You're here, aren't you?" I said, my voice level. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. "That's all that matters." "Let's just get this over with," she said, pulling a folded document from her purse. It was the hospital consent form. "Sign this, and we can all go home." I didn't even look at it. I pushed it back across the table. "I told you. We're not doing this on your terms." I reached into my own bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen. It was plain printer paper, nothing fancy. I'd typed it up in my office between patient consultations. I slid it in front of her. "What is this?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "My terms," I said simply. "You want my signature? You'll give me yours first." Arthur, who had been staring at the sticky patch on the table, finally looked up. His eyes, the same blue as mine, were clouded with weariness. Barbara snatched the paper. I watched her read it, her perfectly lipsticked mouth tightening into a thin line. Her face went from annoyed to confused, then to pure, unadulterated rage. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. She slammed the paper down on the table. "This is blackmail." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "I thought it was a family negotiation. You taught me that everything is a transaction, remember? My future for your social standing, my happiness for your business deals with Bryce's family. This is just another deal." "What does it say?" Arthur asked, his voice raspy. Barbara ignored him. "An apology?" She spat the word. "A public apology? And you want us to put $500,000 into a trust fund for Mark?" "He's my fiancé," I said. "And that's not a trust fund. It's a scholarship fund for underprivileged medical students at Johns Hopkins. In my name." the Dr. Claire Miller Scholarship. Think of it as reparations for the education you refused to support. This is insane, she said, shaking her head. We will not be humiliated. You already were, I said, my voice dropping. The moment you had to call me. The moment you realized that the messy, vulgar job you despised was the only thing standing between him and death. The humiliation is already here, Barbara. This is just the paperwork. I looked at my father. The document requires you to acknowledge in writing that disowning me was a mistake, that my career choice is valid and that you are proud of me. I paused. It also states that you will attend my wedding to Mark and behave with civility and respect. And finally, it transfers medical power of attorney to me permanently, not just for this procedure. For everything, from now on. I will make the decisions about your health, Arthur, not her. The color drained from Barbara's face. I had taken her power, the one thing she valued above all else. She was no longer in control of her husband's life. I was. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm a surgeon, I corrected her. I cut out the sickness to save the patient. Our family has been sick for a very long time. I pushed the pen across the table. It stopped right in front of my father. Your choice. Sign my document, and I'll sign yours. Dr. Evans is waiting for my call, but he won't wait forever. The clock is ticking, Arthur. Literally. I stood up, leaving the coffee untouched. I placed a $10 bill on the table. You know where to find me when you've made your decision. I walked out of the diner without looking back, the bell on the door jingling softly behind me, leaving them alone in the cracked vinyl booth with the 2 pieces of paper that held a life in the balance. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked for nearly an hour, the city lights blurring around me. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if I was shedding a decade of weight I didn't even know I was carrying. The cold air was sharp in my lungs, a clean feeling that cut through the lingering smell of diner grease and my mother's expensive perfume. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't happy. I was just calm. It was the same calm I felt before a complex surgery, when all the variables were laid out and all that was left was the execution. When I finally got back to our apartment, Mark was on the couch pretending to read, but I knew he'd been waiting. He looked up, his eyes full of questions he didn't ask. I just nodded, and he opened his arms. I sank down next to him, the lumpy cushions feeling more luxurious than any furniture my parents owned. They refused, I said into his shoulder. As expected. Are you okay? He asked, his voice a low rumble against my ear. I think so, I said, pulling back to look at him. It was strange, Mark. For the first time, I wasn't the scared 22-year-old. I was their doctor, and they were the terrified family in the waiting room. I showed him my hands. They were perfectly steady. Dr. Evans was right. It's not about strength. It's about control. We didn't talk about it much more that night. We ordered pizza, watched a stupid movie, and fell asleep on the couch. It felt normal, and I clung to that normality like a lifeline. For the next 2 days, there was nothing. Silence. I went to work, performed a 4-hour mitral valve replacement, did my rounds, and answered my pages. A part of me expected a call from their lawyer, Mr. Grant, threatening legal action. I half hoped for it. I had already consulted with a pro bono lawyer at the hospital. My legal standing was ironclad. I was the next of kin. The power was mine. But the call never came. The silence was a different kind of weapon, one they'd used on me for years. It was meant to make me doubt myself, to make me anxious, to make me fold. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I knew what this was. It was a negotiation, a cold war. They were waiting for me to break. I was waiting for his heart to force their hand. It was a grim, terrible calculus, but they had taught me the math. My father, Arthur, had always loved the saying, "Patience is a virtue." He used it to justify waiting for the right stock to mature or the right business rival to fail. He saw patience as a passive act of waiting for power to fall into your lap. He never understood that true patience is active. It's holding the scalpel steady, waiting for the precise moment to make the cut. The call came on the 3rd night, just after midnight. I was on call, dozing in a cramped little room at the hospital. My personal cell phone buzzed on the nightstand, a frantic, angry sound. It was my mother. "He's in the emergency room," she said, without any preamble. Her voice was a raw, ragged thing I barely recognized. The polished society woman was gone, replaced by a terrified wife. He collapsed again. "It's worse this time, Claire. Much worse." I sat up, instantly awake. The surgeon in me took over, my mind clicking through protocols and possibilities. "Which hospital?" "Cedar Crest," she sobbed. "We were at a charity gala. He just fell." His face was so gray. Cedar Crest. Dr. Evans's hospital, of course. They were trying to get him closer to the source, hoping proximity would change the rules. "Is he stable?" I asked, my voice crisp and professional. "I don't know. They won't tell me anything. They're running tests. They're talking about emergency bypass. But they all say it's just a temporary fix. They said he needs the regeneration therapy, and he needs it now." She took a shuddering breath. "The head of cardiology, a Dr. Peterson, he came to talk to me. He knows Dr. Evans. He knows you." I waited. He said the hospital's position hasn't changed," Barbara whispered. "He said the ethics board met this evening. Without your signature, their hands are tied. They can provide palliative care, make him comfortable, but they can't do the procedure. Make him comfortable. The clinical, sterile phrase for letting a person die with dignity." "Where is the document, Barbara?" I asked quietly. "What?" "The paper I gave you at the diner. My terms. Where is it?" There was a pause. I could hear the beeping of machines in the background, the soundtrack of a life hanging in the balance. "It's in my purse," she said, her voice small. "And the pen?" Another pause. "It's here too." "Good," I said. "I'm on my way. Have it signed when I get there. Both of you. And Barbara?" "Yes." She sounded desperate for any instruction, any command. "This time you will call me Dr. Miller." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment in the quiet, sterile room. The war of attrition was over. The final negotiation was about to begin. And I was walking in not as a daughter, but as the only person in the world who could grant them what they wanted. I grabbed my white coat, my face a mask of professional calm, and walked out to save the life of the man who had thrown mine away. The drive to the hospital was a blur of city lights smeared by the rain on the town car's window. I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even the ghost of a daughter's concern. It was as if the last 10 years had carefully, methodically scooped out that part of me, leaving behind a smooth, sterile cavity where a heart used to be. My father used to say, in his world of art and auctions, "Every piece has its price, and every debt is eventually collected." I stared at my reflection in the dark glass, the professional, calm face of Dr. Miller looking back at me. The debt was being collected tonight. I walked through the automatic doors of Mount Sinai's cardiac wing. This was my world. The familiar scent of antiseptic, the quiet squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished linoleum, the hushed, serious tones of nurses at their stations. Here, I wasn't the disowned daughter. I was a respected surgeon. People nodded at me. "Dr. Miller," a young resident said, passing by. I gave a curt nod in return. I found my mother, Barbara, in the private waiting room reserved for families of critical patients. The room was designed to be soothing, with soft lighting and chairs upholstered in a muted blue velvet, but it felt like a cage. She looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken. The designer clothes she wore, a silk blouse and tailored trousers, seemed to hang off her frame. Her perfectly styled blonde hair had strands of gray I'd never seen, and her eyes, when they met mine, were red-rimmed and hollow. She was holding a designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. "Claire," she breathed, standing up. Her voice was a fragile thing. "It's Dr. Miller," I corrected her, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "And you're in my hospital." She flinched as if I had struck her. "Please," she whispered. His numbers are dropping. "I'm aware of your husband's condition," I said, keeping my distance. I've reviewed his chart. The procedure is complex but feasible. The ethics board, however, requires my consent. Where is the document? Her hand trembled as she opened her purse and pulled out the single sheet of paper I had written on at the diner. It was just a simple piece of notebook paper, incongruous with her expensive surroundings. Next to it was a pen, a sleek silver fountain pen, probably a Mont Blanc. Even in her desperation, she couldn't help but cling to the symbols of their wealth. "We'll sign it," she said quickly. "Anything. Just save him." "Both of you," I stated. "The terms are for you and for him." "Where is he?" She led me not to his private room, but to a small consultation office nearby. My father, Arthur, was sitting in a wheelchair, an oxygen tube clipped to his nose. He looked like a faded photograph of the powerful man he once was. His skin was waxy and pale, his breathing shallow. The man who had dismissed my life's ambition with a silent polishing of his glasses now couldn't even breathe without assistance. He tried to speak, but it came out as a weak, rasping sound. I placed the paper on the small table in front of him. "You need to sign this," I said, my voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel. I looked from him to my mother. "Both of you." Barbara took the pen, her hand shaking so much she could barely hold it. She signed her name, her elegant signature now a jagged, desperate scrawl. Then she held the pen out to Arthur. He reached for it, his own hand frail and spotted with age. His eyes, watery and pleading, were locked on mine. For a fleeting second, I saw not the tyrant, but a scared old man. I pushed the image away. He managed to scratch out a semblance of his name at the bottom of the page. The ink was shaky, a testament to his weakness. The deal was done. I picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it in the pocket of my white coat. "Good," I said. "I will now inform the board that I have given my consent. They will begin prepping him for surgery within the hour." A wave of relief washed over Barbara's face. She started to cry, quiet, grateful sobs. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you, Claire." I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Dr. Miller," I said without looking back at her. "And you're welcome." I stepped out into the hallway, the signed document feeling heavy in my pocket. "Oh, and Barbara," I added, turning my head slightly. "This was just to get my signature. My real terms, we'll discuss those after he survives the surgery. This was only step one." Her words hung in the sterile air of the hospital corridor, a ghost of a life I had left behind. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I walked away, the crisp paper in my pocket feeling less like a contract and more like a declaration of war. This wasn't about saving him. It was about dismantling them, piece by piece, using the very skills they had called vulgar. Inside the scrub room, the world outside faded away. Here, there were no last names, no family histories, no art galleries. There was only science, skill, and the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. I washed my hands methodically, the warm water and antiseptic soap a familiar ritual. My hands, which my mother insisted should be holding a champagne flute at a gallery opening, were steady. They were the hands of a surgeon. As I pulled on the sterile gloves, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. I was 14, sitting in my father's study. He was showing me a sketch by a famous artist, a single, unbroken charcoal line that formed a perfect human face. He tapped the paper with his manicured finger. "Precision is power, Claire," he'd said, his voice smooth and confident. "A single, perfect line can be worth more than 1,000 messy brushstrokes. Remember that." He meant it as a lesson in aesthetics, in business. He never imagined I would apply it to the human body. The operating theater was cold, bright, and smelled of antiseptic. My father, Arthur, lay on the table, a blue sterile drape covering everything but a small, prepped area on his chest. He was no longer my father. He was a patient, a collection of organs and vessels that needed repair. My team was ready, their faces masked, their eyes focused on me. They trusted me. Here, I was not the disowned daughter. I was Dr. Miller, the chief resident. "Scalpel," I said, my voice calm and clear. The instrument was placed firmly in my hand. The metal was cool against my glove. I looked at the pale skin, the faint blue veins beneath. Then I remembered his words. Precision is power. I made the first incision. A single perfect line. The surgery was long and difficult, a delicate dance on the edge of a razor. For 6 hours, the only world that existed was the intricate network inside my father's chest. I worked with a focus so intense it felt like a trance. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was a machine of flesh and bone, executing a series of precise, calculated movements. I was saving the man who had thrown me away, not out of love or forgiveness, but as a demonstration of my power. The power he had never wanted me to have. When it was over, I stepped back from the table, my arms aching, my back stiff. The final stitches were in place. His heart was beating steadily, strongly. Close him up, I told the assisting surgeon, my voice raspy with fatigue. I stripped off my gloves and mask and walked out of the OR. I found my mother, Barbara, pacing in the private waiting room they had undoubtedly paid a fortune for. When she saw me, she rushed forward, her face a mess of fear and hope. Is he? The surgery was successful, I said, my voice flat. He's stable, he'll be in recovery for several hours. The relief that flooded her features was so profound it was almost ugly. She started to sob, clutching a ridiculously expensive Hermes handbag to her chest. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Claire. I knew you could do it. I knew it. She fumbled with the clasp of her bag and pulled out a checkbook. The same silver Mont Blanc pen appeared. We want to compensate you for your time, of course, and a donation to the hospital. Whatever you think is appropriate. I stared at the checkbook in her hand. After everything, after 10 years of silence, she thought this could be settled with money. She thought she could buy my forgiveness, buy her way out of the consequences. The rage I had kept so tightly controlled during the surgery now simmered just below the surface. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I looked at her, my expression as cold and sterile as the operating room I had just left. Put that away, Barbara, I said softly. You don't have enough money to pay for what I just did. Her hand froze. Her eyes widened. That signature, I said, tapping the pocket of my scrubs where the folded paper now resided. That was just my consent to perform the surgery, my fee. Now that he's alive, we can discuss my real terms. Meet me in the hospital cafeteria in 1 hour, and come alone. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her checkbook, the color draining from her face as she began to understand that this was far from over. This was just the beginning. The hospital cafeteria was a special kind of hell. It smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, a combination that always reminded me of my first year as an intern. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the linoleum floors. I chose a small table in the corner, its surface sticky from a previous spill. This was my world. A world of function over form, of life and death decisions made under harsh lighting, fueled by bad coffee. It was a world away from the silent, curated beauty of their art gallery. I didn't have to wait long. Barbara arrived exactly 1 hour later, looking as out of place as a swan in a mud puddle. Her Chanel suit was immaculate. Her pearls glowed softly against her skin, but her face was pale and her hands trembled slightly. She clutched her Hermes bag like a shield. She scanned the room, her nose wrinkled in distaste, until her eyes landed on me. She walked over cautiously, as if afraid the floor might swallow her whole. "Claire," she said, her voice a strained whisper. She remained standing. This is hardly an appropriate place to discuss family matters. Sit down, Barbara, I said, not looking up from the lukewarm coffee I was stirring with a plastic stick. The sound of it scraping against the styrofoam cup seemed to grate on her nerves. She sat, placing her expensive handbag on the chair beside her, keeping it from touching anything. My father is alive because of me, I began, my tone even and clinical. He is stable, but his recovery will be long. He will require follow-up care, specialized care, care that I, as the chief surgical resident and the one who just rebuilt his aortic valve, will oversee. My father's silence was louder than her screams, and I was disinherited at 22. What would you have done in my place? Comment what you think and share. She nodded eagerly. Of course. And we are so grateful. I told you, we will compensate. Stop talking about money. I cut her off, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. You think this is about money? After 10 years, you think a check makes everything right? I finally looked at her, and I let her see the cold fury I had kept locked away. You didn't call when I graduated. You didn't call when my research was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. You didn't call when I got engaged. You sent a lawyer. Now you need something, and you think you can buy it. Tears welled in her eyes. We did what we thought was best. We were trying to protect you. You were trying to control me, I corrected her, and you lost. Now I'm in control. So you're going to listen. These are my terms. They are not negotiable. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the sticky table. Term number 1, you will issue a public apology, not to me, to the people you lied to. You will host one of your charity galas, and in front of all your society friends, you will announce that you were wrong to disown me, that you are proud of my accomplishments as a surgeon, and you will introduce me and my fiancé, Mark. Her jaw dropped. Claire, that's humiliating. That's the point, I said flatly. Term number 2, the gallery. You wanted me to run it. Fine, I will. You will sign over a 51% controlling interest to me. Effective immediately. I will run it as I see fit. You and Arthur will become silent partners. But that's your father's legacy, she gasped. It's my legacy now, I replied. I'll be funding a new wing for emerging artists from underprivileged backgrounds. Your friends will hate it. Term number 3. You and Arthur will come to my apartment for dinner this Friday. You will meet Mark. You will treat him with the respect he deserves. You will not mention Bryce or his family or your failed business plans for my life. You will be polite, and you will eat the dinner I cook in my one-bedroom apartment that you would probably consider a closet. She stared at me, speechless. The reality of her situation was finally dawning on her. She had no power here. The woman who had dictated every aspect of my life for 22 years was now completely at my mercy. And finally, I said, my voice dropping lower, you will never again refer to my profession as messy or vulgar. You will call me Dr. Claire Thompson, and every time you look at your husband, you will remember that his heart is beating because of my messy, vulgar hands. I remembered what my father had once told me during a rare moment of mentorship before he decided I wasn't a worthy investment. We were looking at a blueprint for one of his buildings. He'd tapped the paper and said, "Precision is power, Claire. A millimeter off here." He'd pointed to a support column, and the whole thing comes down. My demands were not random acts of cruelty. They were precise. Each one was a support column of my old life, and I was knocking them down one by one. Barbara was pale, her breathing shallow. "You can't ask this of us," she whispered. "I'm not asking," I said, standing up. "I'm telling you. You have until tomorrow morning to have your lawyer, Mr. Grant, draw up the papers for the gallery. If they are not on my desk by 9 a.m., I will sign my father's discharge papers and recommend a very competent but much less invested surgeon in another state for his follow-up care. The choice is yours." I turned and walked away, leaving her alone at the sticky table in the middle of the humming, fluorescent hell of the cafeteria, with the ruins of the world she had built crumbling around her. I didn't go far. I went to the on-call room, a space no bigger than a closet with a lumpy mattress and the constant smell of antiseptic. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a battle I had been fighting inside my head for 10 years. I had just won the first major engagement. I sat on the edge of the cot and stared at the scuffed linoleum floor. For a decade, I had imagined this confrontation. In my fantasies, I was always angrier, louder. But the reality was colder, quieter, and far more satisfying. I expected a call. I expected screaming, threats, another attempt at emotional blackmail. What I got was silence. For 3 hours, I did my rounds, checking on post-op patients, signing charts, my mind a strange mix of clinical focus and nervous energy. Every buzz of my pager made my heart jump. But it was never her. It was a nurse with a question about pain medication, an intern needing a consult. My life, the one I had built, went on. At 6 p.m., as I was grabbing my coat, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Manhattan area code. I answered. "Dr. Thompson?" The voice was dry, like old paper. I recognized it instantly. Mr. Grant. "This is she," I said, my own voice steady. "I am calling on behalf of my clients, Arthur and Barbara Thompson," he said, the formality of it almost comical. "I have been instructed to draft the necessary documents to transfer a 51% controlling interest of the Thompson Gallery holdings to you." I held my breath. There was no argument, no negotiation, just the flat, legal tone of defeat. "The documents will be delivered by courier to your office at Mount Sinai tomorrow morning by 9 a.m., he continued. "My clients have also agreed to your other stipulations. Mrs. Thompson will be in contact regarding the scheduling of the gala." "And the dinner?" I asked, the words tasting like victory. There was a slight pause. "They will be at your residence this Friday at 7 p.m., is that correct?" "That's correct, Mr. Grant," I said. "Thank you for your efficiency." I hung up before he could reply. I leaned against the cold wall of the hospital corridor, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. It was done. Just like that. No dramatic courtroom confession, no tearful breakdown, just a business transaction. It was their language, after all. I had finally learned to speak it. Walking home, the city lights blurred around me. I thought about the gallery. My gallery. I wouldn't sell it or destroy it. That would be too simple. I would transform it. I would use their monument to high society exclusion and turn it into a platform for artists who had been shut out, just like I was. Artists with messy, vulgar, brilliant talent. I remembered my father's words again, standing over those blueprints all those years ago. "Precision is power, Claire. A millimeter off here, and the whole thing comes down." My demands weren't just about revenge. They were precise. The gala would shatter their public image. The gallery would dismantle their legacy. And the dinner. The dinner was about bringing them down from their marble tower and forcing them to see the life they had thrown away. A life that was happier and more real than anything they had ever known. Each demand was a support column, and I was removing them with surgical accuracy. When I got home, Mark was in the kitchen, making pasta. The smell of garlic and basil filled our small apartment. He looked up and smiled, and the tension in my shoulders eased for the first time all day. "How was your day?" he asked, stirring the sauce. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him from behind, resting my chin on his shoulder. "Eventful," I said. "I have to operate on my father." He stilled, turning around to face me, his expression full of concern. "Claire, are you okay? What happened?" "He needs a valve replacement. I'm the only one here qualified to do the specific procedure he needs," I explained, my voice flat. "And my mother asked me to do it." He searched my face. "You don't have to, you know. No one would blame you." "I know," I said. "But I'm going to. On my terms." I told him everything. The cafeteria, the list of demands, the phone call from Mr. Grant. I watched his eyes widen as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "So, they're coming for dinner? Here? On Friday?" he asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Yes," I said. "I hope that's okay." He pulled me into a hug, holding me tight. "Of course it's okay. This is your home." "Our home." He pulled back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "So, what does one serve to the parents who disowned you when they're forced to dine in your closet-sized apartment to save your father's life?" I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "I was thinking lasagna," I said. "The messy kind." The 2 days leading up to Friday were silent. I didn't hear from Mr. Grant or my mother, but I knew they were scrambling. I could picture the frantic phone calls, the meetings in wood-paneled offices, the sheer disbelief that their carefully constructed world was being dictated to by the daughter they had discarded. The silence wasn't a sign of their refusal. It was the sound of their surrender. At the hospital, I was focused, my hands steady during a complicated 7-hour procedure. But in the quiet moments, in the locker room or walking home, I felt the weight of the coming confrontation. Mark was my anchor. He didn't ask a million questions. He just made sure I ate, refilled my coffee mug, and held my hand while we watched old movies on the couch. His presence was a quiet reminder of the life I had built, a life that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with me. On Friday morning, I called in for a personal day. The hospital administration understood. Operating on a family member, even an estranged one, was a unique kind of pressure. But I wasn't preparing for surgery. I was preparing for battle. I went to the little Italian market down the street and bought the ingredients for lasagna. Fresh pasta sheets, ricotta, mozzarella, a rich tomato sauce I would simmer for hours. As I chopped onions and garlic, the rhythmic motion of the knife on the cutting board was calming. This meal was a statement. My parents' lives were built on catered events with tiny, perfect portions of food you couldn't pronounce. I was making them something real, something messy, something from my world. Our apartment was small, but I made it immaculate. I cleaned every surface, arranged the books on our shelves, and put a small vase of grocery store flowers on our simple wooden dining table. It was a table Mark and I had found at a flea market and sanded down ourselves. It had character. It had history. It was everything my parents hated. As I layered the pasta and cheese into the baking dish, I remembered my father's words again. That phrase he'd repeated so often during my childhood. Precision is power, Claire. A millimeter off here and the whole thing comes down. I looked at my plan, laid out in my mind like a surgical field. The demands were not random acts of anger. They were precise incisions, designed to dismantle the structure of their pride, one support at a time. I was using his own philosophy against him. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was focus. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through our small apartment. Mark came and stood beside me, his hand finding the small of my back. "You ready?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart beating a steady, surgical rhythm. I opened the door. They stood there, framed in the doorway like a portrait from another world. My mother, Barbara, wore a cashmere coat that probably cost more than our rent for a year. Her face was a tight mask of disapproval. My father, Arthur, looked smaller than I remembered. His expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame, and his skin had a gray, tired look to it. The powerful man who had dismissed my life's ambition with a wave of his hand was gone. In his place was a sick, frightened old man. Their eyes swept over our living room, taking in the worn armchair, the overflowing bookshelves, the mismatched coffee mugs. I saw a flicker of disgust in my mother's eyes before she masked it with a brittle smile. "Claire," she said, her voice dripping with forced pleasantry. "This is quaint." "It's home, Mother," I replied, my voice even. I stepped aside to let them in. "Please, come in." Arthur shuffled past me without making eye contact, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked exhausted, the effort of climbing the 2 flights of stairs to our apartment clearly visible. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. I pushed it down. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Mark extended a hand to my father. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Mark. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." My father shook his hand weakly, mumbling a greeting. My mother just gave Mark a brief, dismissive nod, as if he were a waiter. I gestured towards our small dining table. The smell of the lasagna, rich with garlic and tomato, filled the air. "Dinner is ready," I said, watching their faces. "I hope you're hungry. We have a lot to discuss." We sat in a silence that was louder than any argument we'd ever had. The only sounds were the soft clinking of forks against plates and the distant wail of a siren on the street below. My mother, Barbara, pushed a piece of lasagna around her plate, her lips pursed as if she'd just tasted something sour. Arthur ate slowly, mechanically, his hand shaking slightly as he brought the fork to his mouth. Mark, bless his heart, tried to fill the void. "This is amazing, Claire," he said, taking a hearty bite. "You've really outdone yourself." I smiled at him, a small, genuine smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you." My mother finally spoke, her voice thin and sharp. "It's rustic." She took a tiny sip of the tap water I'd served in our mismatched glasses. "I suppose you don't keep a wine cellar in a place like this." "No, Mother. I keep life-saving equipment and medical journals," I replied calmly. "Different priorities." Her eyes narrowed. "There's no need for that tone, Claire. We came here in good faith." "Did you?" I asked, placing my fork down gently. The sound was a period at the end of a sentence. Did you come here in good faith? Or did you come here because you have no other options? Arthur flinched, a piece of pasta falling from his fork back onto the plate with a soft splat. He didn't look up. We came here to discuss your father's health, Barbara snapped, her composure cracking. A matter of life and death, which you, of all people, should understand. I understand it perfectly, I said, my voice dropping to the low, steady tone I used with frightened families in the hospital. I understand that Dad has a severe aortic aneurysm. I understand that it's a ticking time bomb. And I understand that the only surgeon in the country with the skill and experience to perform the experimental procedure that will save him is Dr. Evans, my mentor. A man who will only perform the surgery if I am his first assist. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I had them. For the first time in my life, I had all the power. So let's not pretend this is a social call, I continued. You're not here because you missed me. You're here because you need me. And for me to agree to help, there are going to be some conditions. Barbara let out a short, incredulous laugh. Conditions? You're making conditions? This is your father's life. Yes, it is, I said, meeting her furious gaze without blinking. A life he was perfectly happy to live without me in it for 10 years. So, yes. Conditions. Arthur finally looked at me. His eyes, once so sharp and dismissive, were cloudy with fear and exhaustion. Claire, please, he whispered, his voice raspy. I ignored him, keeping my focus on my mother. She was the gatekeeper, the enforcer of their cold, transactional world. She was the one I needed to break first. Condition number 1, I said, my voice as precise as a scalpel. You will apologize, not to me. You will apologize to Mark. The room went completely still. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise. My mother stared as if I'd sprouted a second head. Excuse me, she sputtered. You heard me. When you walked in here, you dismissed him. You looked at the man I love, the man who has supported me through everything you put me through, as if he were a piece of furniture. You will look him in the eye, you will call him by his name, and you will apologize for your rudeness. That's absurd, Barbara scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I did no such thing. You did, I said, my voice hardening, and you will fix it, right now, or this dinner is over, and you can find another surgeon. The threat landed with the force of a physical blow. My mother's face went from red with anger to pale with shock. She looked from me to my father, who was staring down at his plate, offering no support. He was a passenger in this now, and he knew it. She turned her head slowly, stiffly, towards Mark. Her jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitching in her cheek. For a moment, I thought she would refuse, that her pride would be more important than her husband's life. Mark, she said, the name sounding foreign and bitter on her tongue. I apologize if my greeting seemed insufficient. It was the most insincere apology I had ever heard, but it was a start. It was a crack in the fortress. Mark, ever the gentleman, simply nodded. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. I picked up my fork again. Good, I said, looking at both of them. Now that we've cleared that up, let's move on to condition number 2. I took a slow bite of my lasagna, letting them wait. Letting them understand that the surgery they so desperately needed would be performed on my terms, one painful incision at a time. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent dining room. Mark's hand found mine under the table, a silent anchor in the storm I was creating. Condition number 2, I began, placing my own fork down with deliberate slowness. I looked directly at my father for the first time. His face was gray, the confident titan of industry I remembered now, just a scared old man. You will fund a scholarship. Barbara let out a short, sharp laugh. A scholarship? What are you talking about, Claire? Is this some kind of shakedown? I'm not finished, I said, my voice cutting through her condescension. You will endow a full-ride scholarship at Mount Sinai for underprivileged students entering the surgical program. It will cover all 4 years of medical school and their residency. It will be for students who, like me, don't have a family fortune to fall back on. I let that sink in. I could see the calculations happening behind my father's eyes. He was a numbers man. The endowment will be for $5 million, I stated. My mother gasped. That's preposterous. We're not just going to give away $5 million because you demand it. You are, I replied calmly. And the scholarship will have a name. It will be called the Dr. Claire Wallace Grant for Surgical Excellence. You will attend the press conference announcing it. You will smile for the cameras. You will publicly acknowledge my name, my title, and my profession. You will attach our family's name and money to the very thing you threw me away for. The color drained from my mother's face. This wasn't about money for her. It was about public humiliation. It was about admitting she was wrong, not to me, but to the entire world she cared so much about. Her friends, her social circle, the people who read about the Wallace family in society pages. Claire, my father said, his voice raspy. Your mother? Can't we just give you the money? I don't want your money, Father, I said, and the truth of that statement felt liberating. I never did. I wanted your support. Since I couldn't have that, I'll settle for this. This is my price. $5 million in my name, for my profession. Non-negotiable. He slumped in his chair, defeated. He knew a bad deal when he saw one, but he also knew when he had no other options. He looked at my mother, but she was staring at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. There's one more, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Condition number 3. I leaned forward, making sure they both saw the absolute certainty in my eyes. This is for you, Mother. Barbara stiffened, her posture becoming rigid. The gallery, I said simply. It was supposed to be my life's work, wasn't it? I was supposed to take it over, host your little parties, and be a lady. You built your entire identity around that gallery. What about it? She hissed. After the surgery is successful and after my father has made a full recovery, you will step down as director, I said. You will retire, and you will hand over control of the Wallace Gallery to a new director. Never, she whispered, shaking her head. Absolutely not. It's my life's work. And my life is mine, I shot back. You will give the directorship to a candidate of my choosing. I paused, letting the final blow land. I've already selected someone. Her name is Anna. You wouldn't know her. She's a brilliant artist from the Bronx. Her parents are immigrants. She paints on canvases she finds in the trash because she can't afford new ones. She is everything you despise. She is talented, she is hungry, and she is going to run your gallery. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. I had taken her money, her name, and now I was coming for her legacy. I was replacing her with a version of myself she could never control. An artist, not a socialite. A creator, not a curator of her husband's wealth. My father put his hand over hers. It was a weak, trembling gesture. Barbara, he said softly. It's just a building. It's not just a building, she cried, her voice cracking. It's everything. Is it more than my life? He asked, and the desperation in his voice finally silenced her. The room was quiet for a full minute. All I could hear was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock that had marked every miserable dinner of my childhood. Finally, my father looked at me. His eyes were wet. We agree, he said, his voice barely audible. We agree to all your conditions. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. The cheap red wine Mark and I loved tasted like victory. Good, I said, placing the glass back on the table. My assistant will call you tomorrow to schedule the pre-operative appointments. The legal documents for the endowment and the gallery transfer should be drawn up by my lawyer, Mr. Grant's replacement, by the end of the week. I expect you to sign them before I pick up a scalpel. I stood up, and Mark stood with me. I didn't look at them again. This dinner is over. We walked out of that house into the cold night air, and I didn't look back. The sound of the heavy oak door closing behind us was a period on a sentence that had run on for a decade. In the car, Mark didn't say anything at first. He just reached over and took my hand, his warmth a stark contrast to the ice that had been flowing through my veins. The silence was comfortable, a shared space where I could finally let my shoulders drop. The surgeon's focus was fading, and I was just Claire again. Are you okay? He finally asked, his voice soft as we merged onto the highway, leaving the perfectly manicured lawns of their world behind. I looked out at the blur of city lights. "I am," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. "I feel quiet." "You did what you had to do," he said simply, and that was all I needed. 2 days later, my new lawyer called. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man I'd hired specifically because he wasn't part of my parents' polished social circle. "It's done, Claire," he said. They signed. The endowment for the public health clinic is funded, and the gallery transfer is legally binding, effective upon Mr. Wallace's successful recovery. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 10 years. The morning of the surgery, I felt a strange calm. The operating room was my sanctuary, a place of sterile order and absolute control. When they wheeled my father in, I didn't see the man who had disowned me. I saw a patient, a complex cardiac case with a high degree of risk. His life was, quite literally, in my hands. The same hands my mother, Barbara, had once called messy and vulgar. I made the first incision. For the next 6 hours, the world outside that room ceased to exist. There was only the steady beep of the heart monitor, the quiet requests for instruments, and the intricate, bloody work of repairing a failing heart. It was messy. It was beautiful. It was the most profound act of creation I could imagine. When I stitched the final suture, my hands were steady. My work was perfect. A day later, I stopped by his private room. He was pale and weak, hooked up to a dozen machines, but he was alive. My mother was sitting in a chair by the window, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. She didn't have her armor of pearls and judgment on. She just looked like a tired, scared woman. My father's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, and there was no anger, no disappointment, just a weary understanding. "Claire," he rasped. "Thank you." I just nodded. "The prognosis is good," I said, my voice professional. "You need to rest. Follow the recovery plan exactly." I didn't stay long. I didn't offer words of comfort. I had done my job. The transaction was complete. 3 days after my father was discharged from the hospital, I took Mark to the Wallace Gallery. From the outside, it looked the same, imposing, cold, a temple to my mother's ego. But when we walked inside, the air was different. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the low hum of excited conversation and the sound of music playing softly from a small speaker. A young woman with paint under her fingernails and a fire in her eyes was directing 2 men on where to hang a large, vibrant canvas that pulsed with color. She saw me and broke into a huge grin. This was Anna. "Dr. Wallace," she said, wiping her hand on her jeans before shaking mine. I still can't believe it. Thank you." "It's all you, Anna," I said, looking around. "Make it something new." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Oh, I will. We're planning a showcase for emerging artists from all 5 boroughs. No trust funds required." I saw it then. My mother's curated collection of safe, expensive art was being replaced by something raw, something real. This wasn't just a building anymore. It was a place of opportunity, a place that would have never accepted someone like Anna under my mother's rule. It would have never accepted someone like me. Mark put his arm around my waist as we stood there, watching Anna work. We didn't stay long. We didn't need to. My victory wasn't in owning the gallery. It was in setting it free. Walking out into the afternoon sun, I felt the last of the old bitterness wash away. I had saved my father's life. I had secured my mother's legacy, just not in the way she'd ever intended. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply taken back the life they tried to take from me, and used my power to build something better in its place. My life was no longer a business transaction they had planned. It was a creation. Messy, beautiful, and entirely mine. From a rejected daughter to a chief resident, I built a life they couldn't erase. My mother's gallery now showcases raw talent, not safe investments. What did you think of my ultimate creation? Subscribe for more intense stories.